Hey guys, this is me, Zach Steele, and Tyler Hobart. This will be the Week 12 buy low, sell high video. We'll just go through the list of 10 players we think you should buy low on and 10 players we think you should sell high on.
Yeah. So we'll start it with Kareem Hunt. He had one of the worst games of his football career probably last week. And I think he had 13 rushes for 11 yards and a touchdown, which is just terrible for any running back, not to mention Kareem Hunt. Whereas Nick Chubb was very efficient that game. So I think people are going to maybe be a little too hasty in judging Kareem Hunt's value right now. But I don't think you should really take last week too heavily into your consideration. And like, he's going to be a fantastic player in the fantasy playoffs. They have a great run schedule. So I think if someone wants to sell him, you go get him.
Yeah, I totally agree. So for number 2 here, we've got Allen Robinson. He's been on here before, but I think a lot of people are really worried about the quarterback situation there, rightfully so, especially with their likely third quarterback coming in this week, depending on the status of Trubisky and Nick Foles. But he's going to get one of his 2 starters back for the fantasy playoff stretch, and that's the schedule that we've really been targeting the whole season. He's a really talented player, and he's really the only player that can move the ball in that offense on a consistent basis. So they're going to find ways to get him involved. He's going to have a really high floor, and the ceiling's super high over the stretch.
Yeah. I like Allen Robinson a lot. So I think you should also go get Miles Sanders. He actually had a pretty solid game last week, but he has hardly been special. And his teammates have been taking away his touchdowns. But I think Miles Sanders has one of the better and more friendly playoff schedules for sure in like Seattle, Green Bay, and Dallas. And he's been averaging 5.7 yards per carry since being back. So I think he's still a fantastic player, just kind of at an odd fit right now in that Eagles offense. But you should go trade for him.
Yeah, I agree. And then like I've got on here's Lamar Jackson. I know he's been a really big disappointment so far this season, but down the stretch, he's going to get a pretty nice schedule with teams like Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Jacksonville. So that's a really nice schedule to have. And he really can't be much worse than he's been lately. Likely the Lamar owner's really fed up. And if you're not completely set at the quarterback, I do still think he has that upside that he could be quarterback 1 in any week. And he's a guy that could certainly win you some games in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah. So Terry McLaurin isn't a super obvious buy low, but I think he's a wide receiver 1 going into the fantasy playoffs. He only trails DK in terms of snap count, and is on pace for 150 targets and just got 5 catches last week. So I think really like not the kind of outing you'd like from a scary Terry, but I think he is going to be very scary in the fantasy playoffs. So I think you should go trade for Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, I agree. So then at number 6 here, we've got Aaron Jones. The last 2 weeks have been a little lackluster for him. I think a lot of people are worried about how much they're seeing Jamal Williams on the field and really just the overall inefficiency of Aaron Jones the last couple of weeks. But he's still finding the end zone. He's got a real nose for it. And it's been some pretty tough matchups. Jamal Williams has always been getting a very similar snap count. So Aaron Jones is the kind of guy that even though he's not on the field every play, they really do make an effort to get him the ball when he's on the field. And as I've stated before, their playoff schedule is really nice. He really could be a top 3 running back over that last couple week stretch, and he's the kind of guy that I want on my fantasy roster heading into the playoffs.
I agree. So I have Alvin Kamara on here last week. Just had a pretty bad performance in especially PPR leagues with 0 targets, and so I think some owners are rightfully pretty scared of that. But I don't think you should be. And he's still a beast and will be the number 1 running back this season. So I think if you can go offer that Kamara owner a haul, you'll be happy to have him in the playoffs, I think.
I agree. So the guy I've got here's Robbie Anderson. He's really slowed down since his hot start at the beginning of the season. A lot of people are seeing DJ Moore kind of come on. He's had a couple of good games in a row, but Anderson's still getting 9 or 10 targets every single week, and he just hasn't been connected on those big plays. His depth of target's a little bit down, but I think a lot of that's just due to game flow, and obviously PJ Walker came in and actually didn't change the offense too much. But basically, Robbie Anderson's still getting the most targets in that offense, and I still do think he's the wide receiver 1 in that offense, and I don't think that he's necessarily being viewed as that, especially with the emergence of Curtis Samuel. So he should be a wide receiver 2 the rest of the season, and I don't think he's necessarily valued at that.
I agree. I like him. So we've had Kenny Goldie on here for a couple weeks, and I think this is one of the last weeks you can really go and get him for cheap. The guy who probably owns Kenny Goldie hasn't seen much in a long time, rightfully so. So I think We all know the player he's going to be and why you drafted him so high. So I think if you have a chance to get Kenny Golladay in a deal, I think you should, going into the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, especially it's looking like he's not going to play again this week, and if the Golladay owner needs to win this week,
That too.
they can't afford to eat the loss, so you could probably get him at a discount. So at number 10, I've got Michael Thomas. He kind of had his first good game of the season this last week, so you might think it's weird that he's on the buy low here, but I don't think a lot of people really believe that Taysom Hill can sustain the kind of production that Michael Thomas put up. But I think something you often see when a backup quarterback comes in is the wide receiver one's target share goes way up. I believe on 6 of the first 7 pass attempts from Taysom Hill, he targeted Michael Thomas. So he's very clearly making an effort to throw the ball to Michael Thomas. He's the clear-cut number 1 receiver in that offense, and there were no passing touchdowns in that game at all. So Michael Thomas, in my mind, just showed what his floor is over the next couple of weeks, and anytime he finds the end zone, he's going to be a top-tier wide receiver.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So players I think you should sell high on. I'll start with Josh Jacobs. I think you want to ride his recent performance, and really I think the main thing with Josh Jacobs for me is that he just has a ton of touchdowns, and so he doesn't necessarily have a favorable fantasy playoff schedule at all, facing some of the harder run defenses in the league, and so I think given that a lot of his points are coming from touchdowns, you should look to get a more efficient running back in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. Number 2 here, I've got DJ Chark. Obviously, he hasn't been necessarily insane the last several weeks, but he's been serviceable, and he's still got that name value associated with him from coming into the draft. But they've got a really tough schedule down the stretch. I believe they play the Ravens. I forget who the other team was in weeks 15 and 16, but they're not teams that I expect the Jaguars to be able to put up very many points against. I don't even know who their starting quarterback's going to be from week to week. So I think Chark's not a guy that I'm comfortable starting every week, and he's certainly a guy that you can trade to get something like that. So I would just move on from him.
For sure. So this one kind of hurts me because what appears to be like a breakout game finally for Jonathan Taylor, but they played Green Bay, who has one of the worst run defenses in the league. And so I think you take this recent performance where he really stood out as the running back one. He should be in that offense, and get out of Jonathan Taylor for a running back that's is going to play for you and play running back 1 snaps every week. So sadly, I think you should sell high on Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you might not get the value you want out of him, but if people buy into it, then I would totally move him. So at 4 here, I've got Jonnu Smith. I know the tight end landscape's really thin, but he's coming off of back-to-back games with touchdowns, and in neither one of them did he break 20 receiving yards. A lot of tight ends are touchdown dependent, but I don't think that I'm necessarily thrilled about that production at all. If you're rostering 2 tight ends and can afford to move Jonnu, I think he's somebody that people are going to value, especially when he's listed. Obviously, he's the 5th highest scoring tight end in fantasy this season, so people see that, but he hasn't really been nearly meeting the production he gave you earlier in the year, and touchdowns recently are just kind of keeping his production up. So if you can move him for any sort of startable asset, I would do it.
Mm-hmm. So another touchdown monster on here is Melvin Gordon. So he had 2 touchdowns last week, and so that really just puts him as really not an elite running back, even though he's giving you running back 2 performance fantasy-wise. And so I think that combined with the DOI suspension, which I think is pretty real, you should absolutely look to sell high on Melvin Gordon's name and touchdown performance.
Yeah, I agree. So another guy I've got on here, Ezekiel Elliott. He finally actually had his first good game of the season without Dak, but I don't think that's something I want to trust. They got to kind of beat up on a pretty lackluster Vikings defense this week, even though they've been playing better as of late. The Vikings defense have been pretty bad this season. Elliott, he fell in the end zone and he still wasn't necessarily elite this week, and I don't think he's going to be nearly matching the production that he gave you this week going forward. You saw Tony Pollard have a big touchdown of his own, so I think the Cowboys will be well suited to get him more involved in the game plan, and I don't think Elliott is the clear-cut RB1 that he was coming into the season, and if you can move him for that off of this last week, I would do it.
Free Tony Pollard. But so we have Curtis Samuel on the sell high for the reasons that we think Robbie Anderson's the only guy you should really own. in Carolina. So Curtis Samuel's been really racking in those touchdowns as well, and really just given the quarterback uncertainty. Although I don't think it's too much of a problem for Robbie Anderson. I do for Curtis Samuel, and so if you can get any value out of him, you'd be wise to do so, I think.
I agree. So that guy kind of hurts to put on here because he's really talented. But Adam Thielen, he's coming off of, I think he's got 4 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. Obviously, he's a really talented receiver, but the Vikings aren't a team that want to throw the ball around as much as they've been doing lately. They've got some really bad matchups with the Buccaneers, Saints, and Bears in their last 3 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. So those aren't matchups that I'm thrilled about, and there's not a really big passing distribution pie to go around, and they really want to use Justin Jefferson down the field. So Adam Thielen, like, he might have a game where he gets 10 targets or whatever, like he did this last week, but he's going to have another one where he gets 4. And I would rather trade him for a receiver that I'm going to get consistent production out of. So I would move on from him after this week if I could.
Mm-hmm. So I have Todd Gurley on here again. This is just a warning. Just I think his last week was a sign of things to come for Todd Gurley going into the end of the season. So I think if you have Todd Gurley and you haven't sold him yet, I really think you should be exploring offers. So he's really gave you all he got earlier in the season, and his schedule gets pretty tough down the road, which includes Tampa Bay. So I think you should really move on from Todd Gurley finally.
Yeah, I agree. And then lastly, I'm going to say here is Chase Edmonds. He had like 19 fantasy points in PPR this last week, and that was on 6 touches. He scored a touchdown, which isn't something I expect him to do very often. If any of those running backs are going to score touchdowns, it's going to be Kenyon Drake. And I think there's a lot of appeal to Chase Edmonds. He's a fun, explosive player, and he's someone that I think a lot of fantasy owners want on their roster, but I don't think he's a player that you can trust to start going forward. So if you can move him for anybody you can trust going down the stretch, I would do it.
I agree.
Cool. So that'll be it. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications when we do more videos like this. We'll look to do a start sit video on Saturday, depending on how busy we're looking during the holidays. But if you've got any trade questions you want to ask us, I know trade deadlines are coming up in a lot of leagues. Please feel free to drop it in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.